Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rem and Sam podcast. Hopping on a Tuesday night before the NBA playoffs get started, and we went to queue up the playoffs to throw on in the background. They were, the pregame shout out to Charles Barkley, but they were running Den of Thieves. TNT is running Den of Thieves right now, so we're getting started a few minutes later than I thought because I hopped on right as Gerard Butler is getting Pablo Schreiber. They've got him pinned down in traffic right after they pulled off the heist, and we're getting ready. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Den of Thieves yet, but right before the final shootout of the movie. And I gotta say, that sequence is probably one of my favorite action shootout sequences from any movie. I mean, there's a good stretch there where it's like there's no music, there's not really any dialogue either, and it's just the guys are basically just open fire on each other, and they're in the road, so there's civilians around in the cars. There's at one point he just like loads up a fully automatic and just, I'm not even sure what type of gun it is. I'm not a gun guy like that, but some type of just insane fully automatic gun, and then just lights up through all the windshields of the cars. It is a pretty intense stretch. So that movie is getting ready to end. I highly recommend. I do enjoy it. Am I gonna have to go back and rewatch Den of Thieves now? It's definitely just moved up the list for movie to hop back in on. But like I said, we're going to talk about the NBA playoffs this weekend with Sam. And today, I just wanted to go back through the NFL draft. I know we talked a little bit about the NFL draft again with Sam this past week. We talked a lot about the quarterbacks that went earlier in the draft. But now that the whole draft has been completed and you can kind of see what some of these teams have been doing, I just wanted to go back and highlight some of the stuff that I kind of liked. Like I said, we already mentioned the quarterbacks that had gotten taken. Caleb Williams was number one overall, and the Bears, they got like the three best players in this draft. They got Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, and Tory Taylor. Shout out to the Iowa punter. The Bears only have 5 picks, but they're going to use one of them on a punter. So I don't know what it says if you're going to draft your rookie quarterback, your potentially transcendent quarterback that everybody's hyping up, number one overall, falls into your lap because of this amazing Bryce Young trade that happens last year. And you're like, okay, this is the guy that we want to hand the keys to the franchise to, but also we're probably going to need to draft a punter as well too later. I mean, I get it if you need a punter, and it is Tory Taylor. Shout out, the guy's a baller. There was no one more loved on that Iowa team. The fans cheered loud. I think cheered the loudest for Tory Taylor out of anybody, at least for the games that I went to. And maybe it's just the games that I went to, but Tory Taylor was on the field a lot the last couple of years for Iowa. And I know Caleb Williams already sent him the text saying that he's not going to be needed much in Chicago, which again is hopefully the plan when you're drafting a young transcendent rookie quarterback. So, I mean, we already kind of like this Bears situation. I'm not going to pick again. Tory Taylor's our guy. Shout out. And if you need the punter, but only 5 draft picks. They get Caleb Williams. Odunze, like I said, is solid. All the reports were if any of the receiver, if by chance, whatever order those top 3 were going to go in, if any of those were at 9, that they were going to stay there and take it. Because there was, again, talks throughout the draft of where was going to be that trade up. But you've got New England at 3 was one of the trade up teams, but if you're a team trading up for Drake May, New England was in love with Drake May, so they're just going to take him. And again, Chicago was, I think, really in love with these rookie wide receivers. So they weren't going to trade out of 9, especially when Odunze is there. Now the offense is kind of a scary offense. And at least, the Madden version of the offense is they've got much better Madden overalls for their skill guys than they have had the last couple of years. I think we saw what DJ Moore could do in that Washington game, that Thursday night Washington game, where he just has like 200 plus yards after the catch, takes a couple of screens to the house for long touchdowns. And I know that Washington secondary was not the strongest unit in the league last year, but now that you're going to have him and Odunze as either one of those guys could be the 1-2 given on, any given night, the matchup, it just, I think stylistically as well too, good compliments for each other. But now that Keenan Allen is like that wide receiver 3 safety blanket where, I mean, he has been the lead guy in I was going to say San Diego, but I guess he was in San Diego and then was with the team when they moved to LA. So shout out to him. He's been to both places, but now that he's reduced in that where he doesn't have to be the number one target, I think is going to be a good move for him in this Bears offense and a good safety blanket for Caleb Williams. So definitely, we're not doing draft grades, but I mean, definitely a great draft for the Bears. The Patriots and Commanders, or I guess Commanders Patriots, did what we expected as well too at 2 and 3. But I did also think it was kind of interesting that both of those teams decided to go with later quarterbacks. The Patriots also drafted Joe Milton. I was at a 6th or a 7th round pick. That was a 6th round pick. Joe Milton, shout out, had a Michigan run in there. It was unfortunately the COVID season and was not necessarily a season that is going to be remembered greatly in the Harbaugh run. But still flashed when he was there and transferred to Tennessee, sat behind Hendon Hooker for a season. And I should say pause the flash when he was there, but sat behind Hendon Hooker. And then in that Tennessee offense was really able to showcase what he did. And then the Commanders went with Sam Hartman, I think, and I don't even think they drafted him. I think they might have signed him in free agency after the draft. And I mean, the Commanders have a history of doing that. They did it with Cousins. They did it with RG3, obviously not investing the same capital in Sam Hartman that they did in Kirk Cousins. And hopefully Jaden Daniels is able to stay on the field a little bit more than RG3 was able to. But interesting that both of those teams felt like they needed to do that. And especially the Patriots as well, too, because they have Brissett there, who is the veteran if you need him to play right away, but could also be the backup quarterback if you needed to. I think he's probably there on a 1-year deal would be my guess. But did they lock down the Jacoby Brissett tenure in New England? But I mean, just like in theory, if they were going to run that back, he again could be a backup behind Drake May to help mentor him and then give you valuable minutes if you were able to need him. Worst case scenario, but they still felt the need to go with just like, hey, we're just going to take a guy. Again, he could be a backup. We need guys in camp to compete anyways. I mean, Milton, the upside, we're not saying we're bringing him in there because we think he's got a shot, but it is always something that I feel like more teams that draft rookie quarterbacks should probably look to do is just take the flyer on the late round guy, because especially in certain classes as well too. I think this was just a good quarterback class. And the fact that Knicks, like there was nobody really in that outside of Spencer Rattler in that middle round range for the quarterback position. Like all the teams that needed him were able to just got him in the first round, and you're able to get a guy like Milton instead of him going to a QB needy team in the middle rounds. He falls to New England. You're able to take the flyer on him in the 6th. Sam Hartman, undrafted, to the Commanders, and both those teams again will, wish luck for Jaden Daniels, especially that he's able to stay healthy behind that offensive line. And the Commanders were another one that the Daniels pick, we're all in on. Hopefully Daniels can be the next version of the healthy RG3 there for the Commanders. But I think, they didn't go offensive line until a little bit later in the 3rd. And then their 2nd round pick, they end up with Johnny Newton. They take him with the 4th pick in the 2nd round. And I don't know if you can necessarily blame them. I don't know if you can blame any team for going best player available. And that's kind of what it was at that point for the Commanders. It's just, it is tough when the best player available is already like the biggest strength on your team, where you have Jonathan Allen and you have Daron Payne there as well too. And both those guys you just signed to extension. So it's not even like, oh, well, what do you know? Jonathan Allen is on free agency. Well, maybe we should double check the Jonathan Allen one quick, because I know they just signed Payne to a multi-year deal. And I think, having depth and having rotation there, Philadelphia has proved over the last couple of seasons that is obviously a valuable thing. But when you're a little bit depleted like them, it would have been curious to see if they potentially could have gone in a different direction. But I thought Newton was a obvious 1st round pick. So I kind of I have talked myself into liking that pick. And I think, there is really no rules as well too. Like for the next couple of seasons, could you play all those guys together? Like I get that in theory, the skill set that an edge guy brings to a defensive line is a nice complement to having, you get your tackles and you got a speed off the edge. And, when you're rushing off the edge too, there's just you got more space to work with. Again, you can use that speed element. It's a different skill set and sometimes athleticism set required. But if your 3 best defensive linemen are all tackles, I mean, and it could work. And if it is getting pressure on the quarterback, and you're able to stop the run and you're able to actually, round out this, like all the areas of the game, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to pull it off. And it does look like Jonathan Allen is signed for this year and then next year, and then he'll be a free agent in the 2026 offseason. So 2 seasons left, including this one for Jonathan Allen. So, a little long-term investment as well there for Newton with the defensive line. Makes me like the pick even a little bit more, but I mean, Sandstrom, the corner, they needed a nickel corner. I mean, they probably just need cornerback help in general, but I think Sandstrom can really give him a boost in that nickel slot right away. And, Luke McCaffrey, again, they already kind of have a nice receiving core there with Dotson and McLaurin, but I think McCaffrey, we'll talk about Brendan Rice when we get to the Chargers, but just the guys with the NFL bloodline, especially later in the draft, I don't know why you wouldn't want to bet on these guys, especially, again, when you have a good receiver room and you're saying, hey, can you come in and be the wide receiver 3, be the wide receiver 4 in certain situations, just be a valuable, an additive asset to the team. I like the swing at taking him in the 3rd round when they did. And then the edge that they got out of Notre Dame as well, too. Sneaky pick. I kind of like for the Commanders, but a lot of work to do for both the Commanders and the Patriots compared to the Bears for building situations around their quarterbacks. But, solid drafts, I would say, for both teams. The Patriots draft, they get Polk as their second pick as Drake May in the 1st round. But there was there was a run-up receiver at that point. So I think Leggett was obviously off the board. Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey. I think it was basically down between him and Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell, where the Colts had traded back. And then the Colts end up taking him with the later pick here. We can check the order for what the positions were taken. But to make Polk, to invest in Polk like that, you kind of think he's going to be, you'd kind of want him to be a number 1 receiver. And I do really like him. But again, Sam was naming the guys in the receiving core last week for the Patriots. And can Polk step in? As a rookie, that'd be tough to do. So yeah, McConkey and Keon Coleman both went. And then Mitchell was the last receiver taken. Not the next pick, but the next receiver off the board for in the 2nd round. And then Malachi Corley, if I said that right, out of Western Kentucky, was the next receiver in the 3rd round to the Jets, was the first pick of the 3rd round. But again, I kind of like if you told me that you were going to walk away with a quarterback as your first pick and a Washington receiver as your 2nd pick, and you're going to be the second best version of that, it's like, what happened? Well, the Bears get Caleb Williams in Adunze, and the Patriots, I guess, trying to run it back with Drake May and Jalen Polk. Good luck to him. Hopefully it works out there with Gerard Mayo and the new coaching staff. But Arizona getting Marvin Harrison, I think, was kind of a lock as well, too. And then they also get Darius Robinson a little bit later. And again, at that point in the 1st round, they got him at the 27th pick. Some of the edges were off the board. Verse had gone. The Vikings had traded up for Turner at that point, and they got him at 17 as well, too. So the tackles were off the board. I guess Newton at that point was still on the board. So if they were just going to go general defensive line help, I guess Newton is the one guy to look at and go him versus Robinson. But in terms of getting an edge guy, Robinson is probably the number 1 guy available. And if you're trying to take an edge as early as possible, I guess that's a good spot to do it. Also, a potential starting corner in the 2nd round in Max Melton out of Rutgers is nice. But I did really like the Trey Benson pick as well, too, the running back out of Florida State. We've seen James Conner with, missed a couple of games due to injury the last couple of years, and we already know where he's at with his life cycle as a running back. So I think you get some short-term insurance, and we're seeing everybody go committee anyways, but also potential long-term RB1 potential. And maybe I just like the pick because I've started preparing for a dynasty draft we've got brewing, and I do kind of have my eyes on Trey Benson for that draft. So I do like the pick in the 3rd round. And they also got, Xavier Thomas, the edge, later pick, 5th round. I think nice swing. They didn't take a receiver again until the 6th round. So I know they got Marvin Harrison early with the first pick that they had, but they had 9 picks between the two receivers that they had taken. So I think that is kind of a lot of faith in Michael Wilson, the guy that they took last year. And I think, a lot of people like him. I kind of like him. So I think if he's your wide receiver 2 there next to Harrison, and they've got Dortch, who can be kind of a dynamic slot guy. I think they really think that Harrison is like not the missing piece to the core, but I think they think that they got a nice solid pieces in place there for Kyler Murray to work with. And for the Falcons, I know we talked about the Penix Cousins thing already with Sam, but I have been thinking about it a little bit more. And, when people were talking about Penix and just about where he needed to be in general in the draft cycle, a lot of the consensus was that he needed to be in a place that had a veteran quarterback there where he could develop. And if you're Atlanta and you take Penix without the veteran quarterback, I mean, you're missing that piece that I think a lot of people think is essential to him being the best version of himself. And the fact that they got the veteran quarterback and the rookie quarterback in the same offseason, can you really knock that for him? Like, what if Cousins had been there for a season already and maybe they're win the division this year, more competitive. Maybe they're competitive in a playoff game or even win a playoff game. But I don't know if with Cousins there, and I think Orlovsky made a great point as well, too, on First Take that, it's not like this team was a piece away from being like a Super Bowl team if they add an edge rusher or a defensive player there at 8. I know some of the rumors were Byron Murphy, so not necessarily an edge, but defensive line help in the top 10. If they had just taken him there, like that's not like, oh, now all of a sudden the Falcons are ready to compete in the NFC. Like, they're definitely a much stronger team in the NFC South. And like Orlovsky said, having Kirk Cousins definitely makes you more competitive in the NFC South as well, too. But they're not that missing piece away from being the Lions quite yet, I would think. So at least to us, I mean, to them, they're a little bit closer. I think they're ready to compete. But if we had been through the Cousins experiment, I think even for a season with the Falcons, and then they take Penix, and I just think people would be a little more relaxed about it. And I don't know if the fact that, again, they got the veteran guy and the rookie guy in the same offseason is necessarily a bad thing. We know the number. We know that they can get out of the Cousins contract after 2 years. And I get that, for Cousins, that may be a little uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to win your camp regardless of who you're playing against. And like we talked about with Sam, I think some of the locker room stuff with Penix is going to be the interesting dynamic to see if there's if we start getting quotes from Bijan about, especially, over the summer and in the training camps and stuff about, oh yeah, Penix, we were at this thing. Penix is cool. Oh yeah, we've been hanging out with Penix. And then, if we just start hearing his name with the guys, then I mean, that definitely is something that I think Cousins has to worry about as well, too. But on the field, you're gonna have to beat your competition anyways. So again, the fact that it happened in the same offseason, I will continue to defend this pick because I kind of like Penix, and I like Penix on this team as well, too, long term, if he's able to develop with Bijan there. I still have, I'm holding on to Kyle Pitts stock. I have hope. Drake London's a nice receiver. So, and the rest of their draft as well, too. They basically went all defense with the rest of their draft, which is what they needed. They got 3 defensive line picks with their next 3 picks. Again, they took Rook Oro. I know I butchered that. My bad, dude. But out of Clemson, the defensive lineman. But they took him over Johnny Newton as well, too. So not criticizing the pick, but again, just monitoring what we had compared to our own board. So, and then Trice with the first pick of the third, with their 3rd round pick, the edge out of Washington. And then they got Brandon Dorless, the tackle out of Oregon, with the 4th round pick. So, I think depending on how you grade those picks, obviously is how you feel about the rest of their draft. But I don't know if you can criticize the rest of their draft because they pick Penix. Again, I really like Penix on this team. So I'll continue to try to find ways to rationalize what happened. But the Ravens were picking at 30 in this draft. They end up getting Nate Wiggins, the corner, a corner that a lot of people, I think, had as just from a a pure talent standpoint, was like, maybe this guy could be the best in the draft. But he's a smaller guy, pause. And I think if he was playing at like 190, 180 something, then even if 180 something, I saw a quote that was saying he's like a Devon Weatherspoon type player. But Devon, if he was even up in that Devon Weatherspoon, it's not like Devon Weatherspoon's the biggest guy in the world, but a little bit more on Nate Wiggins, where he slid to the Ravens. But a great spot with them where they have Humphrey as well, too, a bigger outside corner who can take that guy. They get the offensive lineman in the second round, and then the edge rusher, Isaac, out of Penn State. Great value in the third round. Tez Walker in the fourth was, I thought, an interesting pick, especially with Brendan Rice on the board. And I know Brendan Rice slid even later than that, but he does feel a little Rashad Bateman-y. And we know how the Rashad Bateman thing worked out. So I actually do like Tez Walker out of North Carolina. But again, just they had that type of receiver there. And Zay Flowers as well, too. It's like, okay, speedster guy. This was a team I thought, if they get Brendan Rice, possession receiver, just like surefire 8 to 12 yards when you need it. And then you have Zay Flowers as well, too. The dynamic gadget guy, down the field guy, can be your wide receiver one. Really have a lot of high hope, a lot of Zay Flowers stock. But then they turn it back around in the fourth and also get TJ Tampa, the corner who slid, which if you listen to the pod we did with Sam, we were clamoring to get TJ Tampa in day 2, and ended up he had to wait till day 3 to go. But I mean, I would give him 5 for 5 on the first 5 picks. I know, like we said, maybe a different type of receiver in that spot, not necessarily the player, but I'm not saying it was a bad pick either. I really like his upside in that offense and a real speedster. So again, the Ravens just had a great draft. I know we said we liked the Bills draft already with Keon Coleman and Cole Bishop as their first 2 picks, but after watching the Keon Coleman pressers, I mean, this guy is like the Anthony Edwards of the NBA. The charisma is off the charts, super charming, super quotable. Maybe going straight for the cookie table right after the press conference explains the 4.6 time. But once you watch the drills, and I think they were clocking his speed on some of the combine drills, where his play speed was maybe the fastest amongst the receivers. So I don't know what's going on with the 40 time. And you can see the look on his face after running the 4 time. He's like, why am I running a 4.6 I'm beating all these guys when I'm playing them on the field. So I think, again, they took him over Leggett. They took him over Mitchell. They took him over some of the guys that tested out a little bit better in the combine. But I can see why you would fall in love with him as a wide receiver one. And again, if he puts up like a 4, even like a 4.5, I think he's probably a first round talent. If you just look at the contested catches that he was making at Florida State and Michigan State on a routine basis. So that pick, just with the press conference, A+, that pick can buy the stock now. Keon Coleman with the Josh Allen hookup, and then Cole Bishop, like we said, we really like the safety. Javon Solomon, the edge out of Troy, was also a good pick later in the draft that I really liked as well too. The rest of the draft, I think Bills fans are pleased with how it turned out, but those were definitely my 3 favorite from the Bills. Speaking of pleased that how the draft turned out, is that a good segue to the Panthers fans who didn't have a first round pick? And again, I really like Xavier Leggett, the Raising Cane's employee that they got at 32. I guess they trade back into the first round, top of the first round, to secure their guy. And then the Bills were able to, they traded back with the Bills, and the Bills were at 33 and got Keon Coleman. And I know if you're trying to build the foundation of a football team around Bryce Young, a good place to start in the draft is wide receiver, running back, linebacker, and tight end as your first 4 picks. So 3 of your first 4 picks, wide receiver, running back, and tight end. I guess this is the future Panthers offense right here. Xavier Leggett, Jonathan Brooks, and Javonte Sanders, along with Bryce Young. Jonathan Mingo as well, too. The fact that they have Mingo there, if him and Leggett are both able to hit, I mean, that's 2 really dynamic run after the catch type athletes. And again, I have a lot of Leggett stock, but Lad McConkey was on the board at that point. And I just wonder if a possession receiver for Bryce Young, where, they do have Thielen, they bring in Deontay Johnson in free agency, but a little bit of a younger guy there would be, again, a different type of receiver to go in the receiver room. I like diversifying the receiver rooms, but a lot of these NFL teams do just kind of tend to gravitate toward the same type of guys. So I'm sure they're looking at the right way to do it. But Trevin Wallace was the linebacker, was the other one of the top 4 picks that they had. And they also got Michael Barrett out of Michigan. So shout out. That guy is probably going to end up being the best player out of this class. And I mean, that's not even a biased take. Look at the guys. It's probably going to happen. Speaking of dynasty, though, Jonathan Brooks was a guy who I've been doing a couple mocks this week as well, too, trying to prepare. And from the mock drafts from the start of the week till, like I said, we're recording this on Tuesday night, his name is quickly rising. So if you're doing your dynasty draft sometime soon, I would say invest in John, maybe sneak him in a little bit higher than you might expect, but he's returning off an injury. So, you never know with that. But I saw a couple of draft comps comparing him to Jamal Charles, and Jamal Charles is like an all-pro running back. So that's not like that's high praise for a running back. I mean, this could be a Breece Hall type situation where you get the running back slide in the second round, and Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker both hit running backs in that draft. I mean, and everybody kind of knew it as well too, but people were just waiting. So I'm not saying that that's not the case here. I just, if you can get Jamal Charles in like the 4th round of your dynasty draft, I think you have to scoop that up right away. And hopefully for the Panthers' sake, I mean, like I said, they just basically decided that this is the future of their offense with the 2024 draft. But I did also really like the Bengals draft as well too. They take Mims at 18 to tackle. They're probably going to need some long-term offensive line help with Joe Burrow there. And I don't know if they just did this to screw over their division rival, the Steelers, because the Steelers have been linked to Mims this entire process. But again, the pick itself is a great pick, great fit for the team. And they signed Trent Brown in free agency as well too. So Orlando Brown, they got last offseason. So they had tackles in place where Mims can develop. I think he only played like 8 games in college. So he can get a little bit more experience, give him some depth as well too, in case they have some injuries. And again, they were another team. It's like, do they go defensive line if Murphy or Newton's on the board in the first round? But they, in the second round, end up getting Chris Jenkins. We like that pick. But the Jermaine Burton pick in the 3rd round was also interesting because, I mean, T. Higgins has obviously requested the trade. He's probably not going to be there long term. And the fact that they went and got Burton as the guy that's like, oh, he could be the T. Higgins replacement. I think T. Higgins has, I would, if I was ranking upside, I would have T. Higgins higher than Burton. But in terms of what they need in that offense, I think if they're like, hey, can Burton be the downfield threat, do the things, I think it'd just be interesting to see what they, again, it's not just can they afford T. Higgins and keep all the guys and be the smart thing and pay the receiver, but what do they actually value in that offense as a role for T. Higgins? And maybe that's another reason why the contract thing is not necessarily lining up the way we think. But they also go another defensive tackle, McKinley Jackson, in the 3rd round, which to get him and Chris Jenkins, I think they can complement each other well and gives you, again, a couple of different looks for defensive tackle for a spot that they really need. They end up in secondary help. I mean, they got a lot of spots and hit a lot of needs that they really needed for contending this year, but also making sure that they're setting themselves up, because it's not just Higgins as well too now that's requested a trade. I know Hendrickson's requested a trade. Like, this team has just got a lot of financial stuff going on for, again, the long-term and the short-term stuff that they really need to balance. So a good, just solid draft I really like from the Bengals. And their draft last year as well too, they went really heavy in the secondary, and this year they went really heavy in the defensive line. So again, those will be the pieces for that defense going forward if they're not able to solidify a deal for Hendrickson long term. The Browns didn't have a 1st round pick because of still the Deshaun Watson trade, but I think people like the Michael Hall move in the 2nd round and Zach Zinner in the 3rd. Good depth for that team. Obviously, the defensive line with Myles Garrett there is, it's established. But, I think Michael Hall is a good solid pick for the Browns. And the Cowboys, I saw people were kind of split on whether or not the Cowboys had a good draft. I think it's because people, Jerry's been saying all in on the offseason, but it really has seemed like that's not the case. I mean, it does seem like, hey, maybe this team is ready to we're not doing the Dak we're not doing the Dak extension. We're going to need some pieces in place for defense long term. I mean, Nealand taking an edge in the second round is clearly like, okay, is DeMarcus Lawrence, are we going to want to re-sign him? I mean, that's the other teams in free agency. It's like, open up your books and get ready to pay DeMarcus Lawrence because he might hit the open market. But, they also did really need offensive line help. They got 2 offensive linemen with two of their first 3 picks. And I think BB as well, too, getting him in the 3rd round. That was a guy that I saw some mocks were having him in the 1st round. And the guards weren't going to go that high, but definitely a wide range of values for BB. And I think getting him in that spot is a good spot. So, I think getting the offensive line solidified is very important for this team being a competitive team now. But that Nealand pick is like, in the way Jerry's been acting, it's like, okay, clearly no surprise that Jerry Jones might be misleading us with what he's trying to do with the Cowboys this offseason. But Denver taking Bo Nix at 12 too. I don't know if I'm trying to talk myself into this one as much as I am with the Michael Penix pick, but maybe it's just for the sake of the Broncos fans in my life. I know too many Broncos fans, and Bo Nix is, a consensus. We'll say for the media out there, Bo Nix, this is not us saying it. We're fans. If you want to call in, we've got your back. But the media is saying that it's a reach that they got you at 12. But I mean, let's be fair. Bo Nix was solid last year at Oregon and was clutch as well too. There was a couple of games where, again, the Michael Penix matchups was that game against the regular season where did they miss the kicker? It got blocked at the end. Like they could have easily had won that game against Washington. And then are they in Washington spot getting beat by Michigan in the national championship game? Who knows? Or maybe it's Texas in the national championship game if it's they're playing Oregon in the playoffs. Who knows how it unfolds? But is Bo Nix in Michael Penix's spot a little bit from the college standpoint? And then would that make it a little more favorable going into the NFL draft? Like, I mean, they needed a quarterback about as badly as anybody, and they didn't even have a 2nd round pick. So it's kind of, there was really no choice. But the rest of their draft, I mean, you have to give them credit. Like Ellis Jones, I think it's Ellis how you say their last name, but his brother's already in the league. I think he plays for the Falcons. Solid pick at the edge. They get Bo Nix's teammate, the wide receiver, Troy Franklin, in the 4th round. Again, great value. And they've needed cornerback help across from Surtain for a couple seasons now. And Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri is another guy where I don't think you're going to bring him in to be your cornerback 1, but I mean, if you're bringing him in to be your cornerback 2 across Surtain, or if he's the nickel guy right away, there's just a lot of ways you could use him. And I think he's a guy that can play a lot better than a 5th round pick. So I think they really managed the rest of the draft well. And I mean, the Bo Nix thing is, again, we have basically no choice unless you want to go Spencer Rattler, and then you have a Spencer Rattler, Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham QB room. So hopefully Bo Nix is able to beat out those guys as the number 12 overall pick and get that starting job in Denver. But I don't know, check downs if Troy Franklin worked in Oregon. So that could be 7 wins. I was going to say 9, definitely not 9 wins for Bo Nix as a rookie. I would say, well, we don't want to do the Broncos season preview, but is the over under like going to be 4.5 for the Broncos? Can we see where they're at on Tankathon for the 2025 draft? I know, shout out to the Panthers fans. The Panthers are already mocked at number 1. Oh, we've got the Broncos at 3. So yeah, the Bo Nix hype is not here for the Denver fans. And they've got the Broncos taking a wide receiver. So I don't know, building around Bo Nix. Maybe Tankathon says that Bo Nix flashes, it doesn't translate to wins. Maybe it's on the defense and it's not even on Bo Nix. But the Tankathon, not to do the way too early 2025 mock, but we've got James Pierce, an edge at 1, Travis Hunter, a cornerback at 2, and then Luther Burden, a receiver at 3. So that leaves Shedeur Sanders on the board, Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, if they want to go with a potential other quarterback. So I don't know, maybe people would buy in for rookie Bo Nix. What is DM Rem and Sam on Instagram? What is the over under for seasons for Bo Nix as a Broncos starter? Can we get 2 seasons out of Bo Nix? I think the Bo Nix thing might not be as bad as people think. I think, again, tough spot that people are saying it's a reach at 12, but we have high hopes for you, Bo Nix. We have your back. We'll be fans. The Lions definitely, well, I don't want to say definitely crushed the draft, but after the way they hit at all these different positions last year, it's like, okay, we had a very specific need. Them and the Eagles both was like, we both need secondary help. And because of the way the first round of the draft or the early half of the draft unfolded, both those teams were able to really benefit from that. And to, long term for Detroit, they get Arnold as getting him at 24, Tyrion Arnold as your potential long-term cornerback one is great value. And then Rakestraw, if I said that right, out of Missouri, the corner who was another corner that I had him slotted in the first round in some mocks, but I think he's only 5'11", 183. So, a little on the smaller side where, well, I don't know, you've got, Arnold at 190. So I don't know, maybe some of the size concerns with our guy, Enos Rakestraw. I don't know if you have to pause that name or not, but Enos Rakestraw, I think if the fact that you could potentially draft your long-term cornerback one and your long-term cornerback two, and I think they both could, they're perfectly suited for those roles, can complement each other very well. And they also traded for Carlton Davis in the offseason, which I think a lot of people forgot. So even if just that move alone really, I think, was a boost for their secondary headed into a playoff run for next year, but can also let these guys develop behind him and then, long-term take over and be the guys. But if it's a playoff series and they need it, like Carlton Davis won a Super Bowl on the Bucs as as one of the two corners as part of that tandem. So he can be a great piece while those guys continue to get those reps. But their division rival, the Packers, had, I don't know, apparently they really needed the safety help because they got 3 safeties in their draft. Also took a linebacker with their second pick, which I think a lot of people really like too. I like Edrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. Again, they also really badly needed offensive line. So whether or not you think Jordan Morgan's a reach at 25, they needed it really bad. But, Lloyd, a backup running back, again, 3 safeties, 2 linebackers. It's a team that it has a lot of talent, a lot of first round talent that's been able to make its way on the field and play. Obviously good, but could have still used a couple of guys in some spots to get out there. And, they're just drafting a lot of multiple positions. Hopefully they're able to get contributions from a bunch of these guys where it's like, you're taking 3 safeties where all these guys are going to be competing for one spot, or you're going to have the 2 linebackers competing for one spot. You've got, also a backup quarterback as well too, which they needed. So, I mean, Kalen King, their last pick in the draft, the 7th round corner out of Penn State, he might be the guy that plays the most minutes out of anybody in this team. Maybe Jordan Morgan, if they move him into guard. Also, Marshawn Lloyd, sneaky, might get on the field a lot as well too. Now that they don't have Aaron Jones, it's just AJ Dillon in the backfield. But again, we're not doing grades, but we're also not saying that anybody had a bad draft. I think that's not what we're here for, but definitely would have been interesting to see what they would have done if they had diversified the positions a little bit more. I also really, really like the Chargers draft. I know the thing is with Harbaugh, when he was in San Francisco, it's not like they drafted super well when he was there. A lot of the guys that they had were, they had before him, Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Vernon Davis. They had a lot of those pieces in place already. They drafted Kaepernick in Harbaugh's first season. They got him in the 2nd round. So, Alex Smith was originally the starter, moves to Kansas City, and then Kaepernick's kind of the guy that gets him into the Super Bowl and into the conference championship races. But so, that pick obviously worked out for him. But I wouldn't say the Harbaugh-led teams have a great drafting track record in San Francisco, but they get a GM who, shocker, out of the Ravens organization, worked with John Harbaugh, and you could see that. I mean, both those guys. I mean, it's the Harbaughs, so I mean, they're going to both build similar teams. They both are going to build physical football teams, and they are doing that by getting Joe Alt with their 1st round pick at number 5. McConkey, like we said, I mean, the Panthers. We'll see how that receiver run ends up shaking out. I'll be curious because it's like back in the day when you get AJ Brown, and I forget who all was going. Let's pull that AJ Brown 2nd round run up because I think that was the one. Was that him and Metcalf both in the same draft? Maybe Deebo Samuel. So you got N'Keal Harry at 32, Deebo Samuel at 36, AJ Brown at 51, McCole Hardman 56, JJ Arcega Whiteside 57, Paris Campbell 59, Andy Isabella 62, and then DK Metcalf 64. I mean, we could just keep going into the third round. Deontay Johnson 66. Okay, Jalen Hurd at 67 is maybe where the run stops. Terry McLaurin at 76 in the third round. Miles Boykin, Hakeem Butler. Okay, I think maybe this is where it officially tails off. Jared Stidham, not a quarterback, but maybe going to play. Oh, no, we're back. Hunter Renfrow in the fifth round gets on the field. Darius Slayton as well, too, plays a little bit. Everybody's had a waiver wire run with Darius Slayton. I don't think anybody has any hard feelings toward the guy. So, I mean, we're missing the point of the second round run, but we'll be curious to see how that shakes out with all those guys. But the Chargers end up snagging McConkey. And I'll just say that I'm really happy that the Colts got Mitchell, especially after really going back and watching the highlights after they made the pick, where I know with the first round guys, I was really hyping up Brian Thomas, especially him versus Malik Neighbors. But Mitchell and Thomas I think Thomas is a little bit more polished, and the foot speed with Thomas, like I said, probably the best in the draft, but just his quickness. And I think the way he can cut off a route, if he's able to polish that up, could just be the best in the draft. But Mitchell basically tested out athletically the exact same. And I think on tape showed us a lot of the same stuff as well, too. So maybe the Penix Ewers thing is a bigger difference than people are noticing yet. Again, Ewers, first round talent. I think we have a lot of Ewers stock, but is he still back on Texas? I think he might have. I was watching some of the dimes that Arch Manning was throwing in the spring game. Yeah, Quinn Ewers still on Texas. So we'll see if he's a first round pick or even the starting quarterback by the end of the season. But I really like shocker Mitchell's chances to be the guy from that run. And the Rams, now that they have a first round pick, are just like defenses are a thing. And I know they went really heavy with defense last year and continue to load up this year. The defensive line obviously needed the help with Aaron Donald leaving. They got Versk. I know we talked about the Fisk pick a little bit with Sam, but they got Corum. They invest in running back as like one of their few offensive guys. They also go receiver and a guard with their very last pick in the 7th round. But again, for the dynasty, for fantasy football, we're keeping an eye on Corum as a sleeper pick. I think if Kyron Williams is healthy, he's clearly the go-to guy, but that's been an up and down. The health has been an up and down thing for Kyron Williams the last couple of seasons. And Corum is just a tough dude to keep off the football field. We saw he was the best running back at Michigan, even though from an NFL standpoint, I don't even know if he's the guy that NFL teams would. I think Donovan Edwards' skill set would be, I think NFL teams would look at that first, but Corum was still the dude on that team. Heisman finalist. I would not put it past Blake Corum to, I mean, there's like a sliver that he wins the starting job, but just being a valuable backup and being a productive fantasy guy as well, too, wouldn't put past our guy, Blake Corum. A couple of other drafts I wanted to highlight. The Dolphins draft was another draft where, Chop Robinson, they went with edge in the first round, and then Patrick Paul, the tackle out of Houston, in the second round. I think some people, I don't know if a lot of people had him slotted in the second round, but they didn't have a third round pick either. So if they need a tackle, again, you got to go with it when you got the pick. And I actually kind of like that pick too, with the upside there. I like Chop Robinson as a depth guy, but I really like the Kamara pick, the edge out of Colorado State in the 5th round, great value. And the running back, Jalen Wright. Again, I'm not overhyping all the rookies from a fantasy perspective, but Achane, I think with his size, there's, going to be concerns about his durability and just how much you'd want to use him as a running back there. Pause in, how much, especially if you're thinking we want to save him and we want him to be his most dynamic during the playoffs. I think Jalen Wright could be a great complement to that. I mean, Mostert as well, too, has had his own health concerns in his career, and the speed for Wright. I mean, he's just like the perfect Miami running back. kind of what they value, and I think he could be productive. I mean, we've seen all the Miami running backs in the San Francisco system, Mike McDaniel's system, running backs be productive. So he could be another one to keep an eye on. Put him on your watch list in whatever fantasy app you're using. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention as well too for the Chargers that they took Brendan Rice along with McConkey. Great receiver draft for the Chargers. I mean, I know they lost both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but I mean, contracts, put the rookie contracts in there. Who would you rather have? Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, or Lad McConkey and Brendan Rice? The Brendan Rice pick is going to be insane for this team. Put him in LA. I think that's going to benefit him somehow, just being in that city. Cam Hart as well too, the corner, I think could potentially play and be a valuable piece for this team going forward. Cornelius Johnson, the Michigan receiver. I mean, all three of those guys, that is a receiving core. They just got a receiving core. Would you rather have the offense that the Panthers drafted in this draft or the offense that the Chargers drafted in this draft? I mean, with the Panthers, you do get a running back in a tight end. And again, we do have Bryce Young stock still, even though my accountant is screaming at me every time I say that to get rid of it. But we're still holding out hope, Bryce Young. We'll see what happens. But imagine if Bryce Young had Lad McConkey, Brendan Rice, and Cornelius Johnson to work with. Would be kind of sick. But I've also kind of been talking myself into this Vikings draft. And I know McCarthy is already headed into a great situation with those receivers, but they did a little bit of what Houston did last year by going quarterback defense. I don't know if McCarthy and Turner is the same upside as Stroud and Anderson, but again, they're going investing on, get a foundational piece for both sides of the ball. And they already kind of have, like I said, the receivers, the foundational pieces for the offense. And they got Greenard in free agency. They did the Greenard Hunter swap basically with the Texans each signing both of those guys. So they already have a pass rusher in place, but Turner could potentially be that number one guy. And we know that, like Harrison Smith, there's already some veteran guys still on that defense. Maybe, I was going to say maybe they could use a corner, but I again, like the corner pick that they made with the 4th round pick. They got Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon, and then they go tackle, which they also need offensive line. So I really did, again, like this Vikings draft. The Reichard pick, hopefully he's able to be a little more clutch, the kicker out of Alabama, than what they've gotten out of Minnesota, the last couple of years. But hopefully for the sake of Minnesota fans, he does feel, hopefully he's not a guy that goes, 50 for 50 and then misses the kick in the last 2 minutes. Because I'm curious to see what that was at Alabama. I know he had his clutch moments, but also had his misses too. I think there was maybe some blocks worked in there. I mean, they got him in the 6th round, so it's not like they had to take him right after Torrey Taylor, but they needed a kicker anyways. But those the first 3 picks with McCarthy, Turner, and then Kyrie Jackson in the 4th, really like that. Solid draft for the Vikings. And then the Eagles, I don't think they need complimented on their draft. Everybody knows that they had an A+ draft. The Jets was another one I wanted to point out where the Fashionow pick was not a name that was linked to him. I think they were linked more to the Washington lineman and then the Oregon State lineman, because both those guys were more like, hey, they could be tackle or guard. So if you need them to play like right away this year, you sign the tackles in free agency, but you can get that guy on the field right away. But Fashionow just as a foundation piece now going forward, I mean, the Jets roster and the building blocks on this roster might be one of my favorite, just if, between Fashionow, Quinnen Williams on the defensive line. I mean, is there a better maybe potential like offense defensive line combo in the league? You get Fashionow and Quinnen Williams, Fashionow on offense, Quinnen Williams on defense. I'm sure like Lane Johnson and Jalen Carter, Chris Jones, and I'm trying to think, the Chiefs don't really have like a left tackle. I don't know. Do we throw Creed Humphrey, the center, into that conversation? But in theory, I mean, and this is a guy as well, too, that was like a projected top 5 pick headed into the college football season. I don't know, his stock fell a little bit, but the fact that you get that kind of upside, and I mean, the tape was still like really good for him this past season. And it's still basically a top 10 pick, basically like a top 5 pick if we take all the quarterbacks out of the equation. But if we take Rodgers out of the equation and just go, is this an attractive team? I mean, it's still like a super attractive destination for a quarterback, but I think long term, if going with that foundational left tackle versus, hey, maybe a guy that could play guard in that situation, because the Rodgers contract, I know he's got a big number this year and there next year, but I mean, that's 2 years. And next year, you're probably in the market for a quarterback. Hopefully, you're not in the market for a quarterback like right away if something happens with Rodgers. But the Jets as just a team where if they're able to get a young quarterback next season or the season after, just a super attractive destination. And now that they have that foundational left tackle, it's not like, oh, Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, we're going to have to do something with that young quarterback, whoever it may be. I mean, 2 running backs after that, when you already have Breece Hall, a little bit crazy, but Corley, the receiver, I think he could potentially contribute right away. Jordan Travis, if you need a backup. I mean, it's a good swing. That guy was a competitor at Florida State and could have definitely won the Heisman this year. I mean, the Jaden Daniels numbers were crazy, but I mean, if Travis is undefeated and has an insane amount of touchdowns, he's probably a ballot guy anyways for that award. But that Fashion Now pick really hit home for the Jets. The Niners, I mean, yeah, solid draft for the Niners again with the Pearsall, the receiver, but Green, the corner as well too. Really like that as the last pick of the second round. I think he's just prototypical San Francisco corners. So I know Sam was saying the draft was the first round was a little bit to chalk, and I get what he was saying, but this was an interesting draft, I think, to go back and look through and see what the teams were doing as a whole, because that probably first 20, 25 picks was pretty stacked. I think Newton was in that group, and a couple other guys, just, top talent was pretty stacked. But after that, like, I mean, second, third, fourth, like just a lot of guys that were, I feel like you could, if you take Brendan Rice in the second round, and nobody is calling that a bad pick whatsoever. People are like applauding you, like, yes, Brendan Rice is a great pick. But again, in the sixth round, like you go through the receivers. I would personally have Rice above those guys, but I don't know if there's great degree of separation. Let's go. The Brendan Rice one has got me a little bit salty, I'm not going to lie, but let's go through and see where he was at. I mean, Mitchell in the second round for the Colts, I think you got to do it if he's on the board. Again, McConkey and all these guys were graded out above him. Polk, Mitchell, Corley, Burton, Roman Wilson, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey, Troy Franklin, Javon Baker, Devontae Walker, Jacob Cowling, Anthony Gold, who probably going to be punt returner for the Colts, but who knows, with these new punt return rules, that might actually be like a pretty valuable thing. Anaya Smith, Jameer Thrash, Bub Means. We got a lot of Bub Means stock. New Orleans is really going to love having him. Jaquan Jackson, Malik Washington, Johnny Wilson, Casey Washington, who didn't get invited to the combine. Maybe Brendan Rice, maybe Atlanta is another team that should have Brendan Rice team. But yeah, I mean, just like all these guys, I think put them in any order, I think it's pretty close. But I really like what some of these teams were able to build out. And I, not to end this on a great note with the Colts, but again, I really like what Ballard did. I wouldn't have agreed with every pick that Ballard made, but I think we needed everything that we got. And again, we didn't get the secondary help, which is the main concern. But looking at next year's class, I don't know if he was doing this or not, but next year's cornerback class is stacked. I know we mentioned some of the names in the mock a little bit earlier, but you've got Travis Hunter is at the top of the draft. Will Johnson, I know Denzel Burke out of Ohio State is up there. And then there was another corner as well, too, whose name is slipping. Oh, Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. I love Benjamin Morrison. He had a great game against, showed some stuff against Marvin Harrison Jr. when they played this last year. You've got those 4 guys potentially. I mean, the thing is, those guys might be like top 12 picks, but all 4 of those guys potentially in the first round available next year. I don't know if Ballard was like looking forward a little bit. We get a corner help next year. We also have Juju Brents. I'm pretty sure Ballard would want to see what they have in him as well, too. He's a second round pick. They invested a lot in him. So I get not going there, but we need the offensive line. The receiver, I think, is a hit. I think Latu, getting him first defender off the board, everybody is in agreement that he's going to be at least a productive asset on this team. And the Latu, Ebucom, Quiddy Payne, I mean, that's just a solid DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart. If they didn't have re-signed Grover Stewart, I think maybe Murphy is in play for that spot, but I think Latu, medicals aside, is a great pick. So that is the NFL draft. Like I said, the playoff games are, well, I was going to say just starting, but we're working our way through the first quarter here. Philly is fighting for their life, up by 3 in the Garden. So be back this weekend for when we talk about the NBA play-in playoff games. Follow Rem and Sam on YouTube, on Instagram. We're on all the socials. We're going to be Rem and Sam or Rem and Sam podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google. I don't even know how many podcast apps are out there, but IT does a good job of getting us out there on basically any platform. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of stuff that has already happened this week for the NBA. Probably a lot of more stuff as we get these series winding down. And as of Tuesday night, when we're recording this, like I said, in the first quarter of Knicks Philly, Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel are still the coaches of their respective teams. I'm Googling Darvin Ham, and it looks like he is still, and I think there was a report today that said they were going to make that decision soon. So they wouldn't just turn around a couple hours later and say, oh yeah, it was sooner, way sooner rather than later. But Frank Vogel himself said that he was pretty confident he was going to return. And up until this point, there has been no news. So once, I don't know, it's kind of like there's like a stat that says if you commit a crime, I don't know if we want to put this out there, but if you commit a crime and there's like a 48-hour window, if you get away with it after 48 hours, like the chances that you actually get away with it go way, way up. I know I just butchered that stat, but it's kind of like that with head coaches, where if you get a 48 hours after the playoff series, maybe it's not as bad as it seems. But I don't know if Frank Vogel is, feeling all that comfortable, even though he said himself that he was. So we'll see by the weekend if that changes. And like I said, stay tuned as these NBA playoff series get underway. We're going to take off and watch the rest of these playoff games tonight, because I know no Giannis, no Dame, but Halliburton's fun. Miles Turner is taking this whole thing personally. So this Pacers team, there's still going to be good playoff action for everybody tonight. We love ending it on a pause. So good night, ladies and gentlemen.